On November 11, 1918, the request for an armistice from Germany, which ended World War I, from the side of France was accepted by General Ferdinand Foch. Later, having read the terms of the Versailles Peace Treaty, Foch stated that it was not peace, but an armistice for 20 years, for the authenticity of the quote, Winston Churchill himself vouched, and as we know, Foch did not lose. The Second World War really continued the First World War, but looking at everything that happened between the two conflicts, a natural question arises. How did Germany manage to recover so quickly after the defeat in the First World War? The answer to this question we'll try to find in the next couple of minutes, starting with an unusual fact that few people usually remember, and who actually said that in World War I, Germany suffered more than France, or let's say Britain. November 11, 1918, on the day of the end of World War, I, from the front line to Paris, was a little more than 200 chem, and to Berlin is almost 900 chem. For the subsequent events somehow forgotten the fact that Germany, all the war was fought on foreign territory, and just in July 18, completed in General Victoria's spring offensive, and then came to the end of the First World War, and then the war was over. And if we left too much, we would get a paradoxical situation where the loser felt better than the winner. Add to this the USA, which lent to Britain and France, so that almost all German reparations had to go overseas. Hence all the problems of the Versailles Peace. It is also difficult to find a balance, and it was the first version of the treaty that caused Germany the most damage. Here you have hyperinflation and large-scale strikes of Germans who did not want to work for France for free, and political instability. If specifically before 1924, the situation was so that to avoid default, Germany underestimated payments, France responded with threats, and in January 1923 occupied 7% of the country's territory. Who is right? Who is whiz? To blame? The question is separate, but in the dry residue, there was an indisputable fact that payments under the Versailles Peace were delayed, and more people realized that it would end either with a new war or bankruptcy of Germany. France tried to compensate for the situation with demands to take away from Germany Saar, Rhineland, and Ruhr, placing the territories under external administration. The USA and Britain realized that this would only lead to a partisan movement and resisted. A buffer zone was created only on the eastern side in the form of Poland, which received German territories. But even here, not everything was so rosy, because the absence of a common border between Germany and the USSR encouraged the two countries to cooperate, and, according to many historians, even united against a common rival. We all remember what this led to, but the main catalyst for the return of the German economy was the Tauisches Plan. On September 1, 1924, the U.S. and Britain finally disengaged France from the issue of German contributions and reconstructed the system of payments, adjusting it to the capabilities of the German economy, which at that time was the Weimar Republic, and at the same time gave it loans for development. Unemployment fell to almost zero, and GDP growth was almost in the triple digits. And despite the loss of territory in 1928, the income of the German population exceeded the pre-war level by a quarter, and the economy grew faster than France and Britain. Well, returning to the question of the USSR in 1922 between the Soviets and the Weimar Republic. Under its terms, the countries made concessions to each other to normalize relations, forgave debts, nationalized enterprises, and everything. Like that. The main thing is that for the USSR and Germany, it was the first equal and human international treaty since the war. We think it is not necessary to specify what impetus it gave to the economy, to the banal self-consciousness of the inhabitants of the states in general. Economically, Germany returned to quite European level by the end of the 20s, but mainly at the expense of loans from the U.S. And when the Great Depression broke out in America, the Germans suffered almost more than anyone else. GDP collapsed, income collapsed, and of course the fragile political stability in the country collapsed. All this opened the way to the power of the Austrian artist, who is often credited with the restoration of the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union. In reality, 80% of the foundation was laid by the Weimar Republic, and the remaining 20% is the good old state debt. The policy of Keynesianism of the Third Reich from 1933 to 39 years. The total revenues of the government amounted to 62 billion marks, while expenditures 101 billion. And for the terrible hole in the budget, few people cared. Hitler openly said that it will be liquidated by conquest of territories. That's actually the whole economy. Much more interesting is the situation with the army, people, and equipment, unlike money, can't be printed. And as if under the terms of the Versailles Peace, the German army was destroyed. So where did the wood come from? In 1939, it's much more complicated than the economy. But the essence is basically the same, and it all come down to the fact that after World War, the German army, in fact, did not go anywhere. Yes, on paper, it was limited in the quantity and quality of equipment. But in reality, everything is the same. Dismissed officers did all the same, but supposedly in civilian positions in 1923, 10 years before Hitler. The aviation inspection was founded. It ensured that military pilots were trained in sports and civilian schools. But by the end of 1923, fighter planes Faker were purchased in Holland, on which pilots were secretly tested. And since 1924, the connection with the USSR began to work. German military pilots as tourists flew to Lipetz, where an aviation school was built in secrecy with these very fakers. Similar secret schools in the USSR were built for German tankers in Kazan and chemists in Volsk, but their importance is often exaggerated. For all the time from the Lipetsk Aviation School, for example, only 220 German pilots graduated, while from the secret school Brown, Swiss, on the territory of Germany, more than 2,000 in general. Statistically speaking, it is more accurate to say that the basis of the Wehrmacht of 1939 was created in Germany itself, just unofficially. That is why when Hitler came to power and military cooperation with the USSR collapsed, Germany did not feel much change, because as in the case of the economy, the Weimar Republic laid the foundation for the army. Walter Dornberger, for example, in 1930 was ordered to create a rocket on liquid fuel. His drawings later transformed into the military Fake 2. The civilian airline Lufthansa, according to documents, suffered huge losses and logically should have been closed by the government, but in reality this did not happen because Lufthansa trained future Luftwaffe pilots on civilian ships. Heinz Guderian, creator of the Blitzkrieg and one of the most successful officers of the Wehrmacht, practiced tank wedges in 1919 on the border with Poland, using trucks, and for the first time sat behind a tank in 1929. In general, militarization was in full swing and did not stop even in the quietest periods of the Weimar Republic. Moreover, many are inclined to believe that it was the secrecy of the lack of technology that prompted German generals and engineers to search for original ways of warfare, which actually resulted in Blitzkrieg missiles and nuclear program. Karl von Ossietzky, German journalist, in 1931 published a series of articles exposing the secret militarization of Germany and the government. For this, he received from the Weimar Republic and the Third Reich. Karl ended up in a concentration camp in the 33rd, and from receiving the Nobel Peace Prize in 1935, his life was not made easier. Von Ossietzky will die in 1938, and almost 5 years before that, Germany will withdraw from the League of Nations, officially announces the creation of the Luftwaffe and the complete abolition of restrictions imposed by the Versailles Treaty. Then, as already mentioned, total militarization of the economy on borrowed funds and budget deficit, which was planned to be corrected by the war. That's how Germany actually recovered after the First World War. First, there was the strange Versailles Peace, full of contradictions and the inability of the Allies to reach a normal agreement. Then the Dawes Plan, which was loyal to Germany. Well, Hitler came with everything ready and only put the economy on fast and furious, directing it in the military direction. In conclusion, we note that even in 1939, France and Britain surpassed Germany industrially. The reasons for the surrender of France is a story for a separate video. See you later, friends.